guys, you have found Colby on Cars, and today I am going to be doing an overview on this gorgeous 2001 Ferrari 360 Spider, finished in Azzurro, California, the blue paint over the light blue and navy blue interior. And we're going to be talking about why you should be buying one of these cars to add to your garage or your collection. So I'm going to cover a number of things about a Ferrari 360 that make it a very good purchase, a very enjoyable car to own, but I want to start back here because in my opinion this is one of the most important areas of the car, the engine. And this is a 3.6 liter. It is an evolution of the 5-valve per cylinder engine that came out of the 355, which is arguably one of the best sounding V8 Ferraris that has ever been produced. This car carries that forward with the help of the slight modification of a tube exhaust. Most people that buy and own these cars, especially in a Spider, appreciate an aftermarket exhaust system. This car also has aftermarket headers, and you can see them a little bit down there. These happen to be fab speeds, and what makes that advantageous, of course, you don't have to worry about the header failure, and we get a little bit more exhaust flow, a little bit more exhaust sound. But these cars, even in stock form, sound amazing. It's pretty hard to beat a flat plane crankshaft V8. And as we move on into the modern versions of the Ferrari V8s, we now have twin turbos on them. They have to do it. Ferrari had to do it to kind of get into the market and make sure they were competitive with McLaren and other makes. Unfortunately, the 458 being the last of the NA V8s, they have lost a little bit of their passion. They've lost a little bit of what makes these cars so amazing to enjoy and drive. So we'll get into the next thing, and this is something that is hard to say isn't the best part of this car, and that would be what is on our screen right now, which is the famed gated 6-speed manual transmission. This piece of equipment, I have to say, out of all the cars I have owned, the cars that I do own, it's pretty hard to beat the mechanical action and the enjoyment that you get from driving a manual transmission 360. Of course, many people would say, well, it's not a 430. The 430 is kind of the top of the line, and I'm not going to argue with that. But the affordability and the accessibility, speaking to a 430 manual versus a 360, is a very different conversation. The 360 was available in manual at a higher percentage than the 430, so they're a little bit more attainable. And it makes the car so much more enjoyable than the flappy paddle gearbox, the F1, and ironically, that was the thing that people wanted when these cars were new. And so the manual transmissions are very rare today, and they are going up in value, which makes it another reason that you want to buy the manual transmission 360. The Ferrari 360 was kind of Ferrari's first venture away from their traditional wedge styling that started way back in the 70s. And at the time that it came out, it was controversial. A lot of people didn't like it. It was a step in a direction that, dare I say, similar to what took the Porsche 911 into the 996 category. I personally think the 360 is gorgeous. I always thought it has been, and now that it's getting an older, let's call it a modern classic, has turned into a design that I believe is absolutely gorgeous and timeless. I won't bore everybody with a bunch of details, but some of the advancements that Ferrari made when they designed the 360 had a lot to do with aerodynamics. As we look at the front of this car and the rounded nature of its design, one of the things that's important to recognize is what happens as the airflow actually travels around it and underneath the car. As we get down lower, you can see that the Ferrari had allowed kind of a tunnel that went underneath the front of the car and progressed back into the diffuser area underneath the engine and allowed that air to pass through and created downforce without having to add any unnecessary wings or goofy aero on the car. Now, the 360 Spider was the first open car that came from Ferrari that had an automatic top that the tonneau would actually open and enclose the soft top underneath, close it when it's down, and give you the opportunity to raise and lower the top without getting out of the car. It was a full power option, unlike the 355 where the seats had to travel forward, which arguably you could have stayed in the car Tall guys like myself, I'm a little over 6 foot, you actually had to get out of the car because the top went down behind the seats and the seats had to move forward. There's a lot of action. With this car, the top goes down very efficiently, it closes up, and even has the power flaps that are here, and you end up with a Spider, which, by the way, pretty hard to argue this is not the most enjoyable way to listen to the symphony of that flat-playing V8 crankshaft Ferrari engine right behind your ears. Now we're talking about modern classics. What you end up with is a very comfortable sports car. These seats are amazingly comfortable. They're very soft, also very supportive. They work with a lot of different body types. You can be a larger guy or you can be a smaller guy or gal, and these seats will hold you without pinching you and making you uncomfortable. This car did have an option for Sparco carbon fiber sport seats. I actually have those in my coupe and I very much like them. However, they're a little bit much for a touring or a longer drive. The standard seats in these cars work extremely well. And as long as we're talking about modern classics, one of the things I very rarely hear mentioned is talk about airbags and how obnoxious they were in earlier cars. The 360, when it came out, was one of the first cars that I know of from Ferrari that had an airbag that was reasonably sized. You can look at that steering wheel and aesthetically it's very pleasing. The airbag area here wasn't so monstrous that it took up the entire steering wheel, kind of like it did in some of the earlier cars. To get a little bit more in depth on what's happening with the gauge cluster here, I went ahead and started the car up, and we're going to show you what's happening here. Now, we've got the tach dead center, which is one of my favorite things about a sports car. I think it's one of the more important gauges, certainly something that you're watching more often than anything else as you're driving the car. And then over here to the left, down below, what we have here is the oil pressure. Right above it we have oil temperature, and over here next to it we have coolant temperature. Now this cutout window down below is just an informational thing. It's telling us we're not wearing our seatbelt. The parking brake is on, and currently we are in sport mode. Over here on this side we have a speedometer, standard speedometer, showing that low mileage, that 13,000 miles. And down below that we have the fuel gauge. Now the fuel gauge obviously is not an analog, it's a digital gauge, and it shows the fuel in bars. To the left of the steering wheel we have this switch panel, and we'll go over quickly what's going on here. So we have the sport button that, when this is switched on in a manual transmission, to my knowledge only does two things. It's going to change how quickly the throttle reacts. This is a drive-by-wire car, and so when you put your foot on the gas pedal and move it in and out, it's very much like turning up the volume knob on a stereo system, potentiometer, and basically what the sport being on, and you can see it being indicated there in that window like we talked about a second ago. With sport on, what it does is it makes the throttle more reactive or more real time once you put your foot on the gas. So with sport off, it's going to react a little bit slower, and the ECU is going to do its best to try to manage the throttle inputs to make a smoother experience. I personally prefer these cars with sport mode on. I think it reacts more like a drive-by-wire vehicle. Next to that, we've got a mirror defrost switch, pretty self-explanatory. We have a blank here. I actually don't know what would be here. I think this is probably maybe a rear fog light for the European market. If you're aware of it, please put down in the comments. I'd love to learn and pass on the information of what that would be. And next to that is your traction control light, or excuse me, traction control switch. So in this case, obviously in almost all cases you would leave that on if you're in a track driving experience, or you want to turn off the arguably kind of antiquated traction control system. This is where you would do it. Below that, we've got two push buttons, and this is something I haven't really seen covered in any other reviews on these cars. And the outer one is going to show us outside temperature. And by the way, that outside temperature is measured by that little tiny nipple that's on the bottom of the left-hand side mirror, at least on a North American spec car. And when we push this button, it activates that display in the bottom of the tachometer telling us it is a 77 degrees outside. Now I can shut that off if I don't want to look at it anymore by pushing it again, and it is now gone. Now the button that's next to that is what we're going to do to change from miles to our trip odometer. And if we hold it, it'll change the trip to 0. And that's how you get to your trip odometer on a Ferrari 360. The Ferrari 360 Modena and Spider's climate control systems are very straightforward. Much more simplistic than some of the later model vehicles like the 458 that has a bunch of buttons and knobs. You essentially have 3 different knobs. You have your air disbursement, you have your temperature setting, and you have your fan control. The 2 buttons that are above it here this is for recirculating air in the cabin, in other words, shutting off outside air, and the stop button, kind of a peculiar way to do it, it shuts off the entire HVAC system. Now, I personally use this system in automatic, which means I'd switch the air disbursement knob to AUT, and I set the temperature at whatever I'd like. In this case, it's 70 degrees. And then we have the fan speed set at automatic as well. That will then have the vehicle's controls be able to work at just keeping the interior temperature, whatever you set on the center dial. And for those who don't know, the way it does that is by this sensor right here. And that is the sensor for the interior temperature of the vehicle, and that's what allows the vehicle to regulate whatever you've set with the center dial. Moving on, let's talk about interior storage inside of a Ferrari 360 Spider. We've got a normal glove box here that we can open, and it's a fairly good size there. It is lit, as you can see. And of course, each door has its own pocket right behind this aluminum trim. It's fairly deep and you can get a few things in there. And then as a Spider, the 360 also has kind of a hidden compartment that sits right here in between the seats. And the way that you open that is underneath this small little hatch in the center console. And you'll see, let's see if we can get you on camera there, a little picture of a door opening here. And you pull this back with the key on and it will open up that compartment. Since we're talking about switches and showing you that rear glove box area, we'll talk about the switches that are in between the 2 seats. Now, you saw me open this cover just a second ago to get to that glove box control. Again, that's what this one is here. Right next to it, this is our top control. Pretty self-explanatory, pretty intuitive. We want to put it up, we push it forward. We want to put it back or down, excuse me, we push it back. This front one opens the frunk. This is going to be actually pretty good storage in these cars, decent amount of size. I'll show you that momentarily. And then this is our fuel door release. Now, one of the things to be aware of in a 360 is the fuel door release will not operate unless you have the ignition on, which can be a bit annoying, but once you learn it, you understand it. Now, something a lot of people aren't aware of is even though the ignition switch needs to be on in order for the frunk release to work, there is another release in these cars. It's a manual release, and it is going to be under the dash. See if I can show you where it is. All right, if we head underneath the dash, just kind of forward of the clutch assembly, you'll see there's a T handle that's hanging right here. And a little tough to see, but we pull down on this, and that will allow us to open that trunk without having to turn on the key. This is the one in my own car I use most frequently because I'm often getting in the trunk without the key being in the ignition, and it's kind of a pain to get into that center console area to do the release. And now we have the trunk open here. You can see what we're dealing with. Pretty good space. You can fit a fair amount of stuff in here. I, in my own car, have had at least a couple suitcases and just a bag for whatever. So you can get quite a bit in here for a weekend or even a week-long trip if you're headed somewhere. I wanted to show you guys this too. This is the inflator kit for the tires. There's no spare tire in a 360 Modena or a Spider, and so they all come with this inflator kit. That's what sits here in the front. I was watching a video the other day, and the guy was saying it's the car cover. It's absolutely not the car cover. That is the inflator. Up in the front here, you'll see that's the tool kit that comes with all these cars, and it gets strapped there into the front. This car has the optional CD changer, which is going to be behind that door right there, and then of course the rest of this is all just for your any luggage or anything you want to carry along inside the car. Now I want to talk about another common issue with 360s that fortunately on this car has been addressed, and that's going to be all the different things that get touched inside of here, like the door handle, the door lock. When these cars came from the factory, they had kind of a rubber coating on them to make all of these different items, the switches, the column cover, and window switches here, either side of the radio, the climate control, the mirror control switches, and the ashtray. Get the keys out of the way. And we won't forget, of course, the door handle over there. And then every single one of these vents, the circular piece that sits around the vents right here, had that similar rubber coating on them. This is, by the way, how you open and close the vent. You can turn these to open and close them. But these all, after a certain amount of years, we get sticky from being in the sun. And this car, all of that has been addressed. And that is something that everybody should be aware of when they're looking at purchasing a 360, is kind of de-stickying all those items. That's enough talk about the car and everything else. Let's get this thing out for a drive and give you an idea of at least my impression of what it's like to operate this vehicle. I will say, as soon as you get in it, immediately when you get in underway, you notice the immediacy this car represents. A lot of it has to do with things that are kind of consistent with any Ferrari, but the noises, the action, the clickety-clack of this shifter that we've already talked about, the way that the car steers, it's very immediate. It does everything very quickly. It's very scalpel-like, and it's something that just, again, you get it as soon as you get in the car. The way that these cars drive, as I was kind of talking about earlier and touching again on the cliche of the modern classic, we still have a very analog experience in a Ferrari 360, especially with the manual transmission, but we do get some of the modern conveniences and some of the modern things that make this car very drivable. Now, I hope that the sound that I am getting to experience sitting in this cabin with the roof down, I hope that it translates well through the microphone and into what you're able to reproduce on whatever you're watching. But I gotta tell you, it is something that I get to experience in my own car anytime I want. However, my car's a coupe, and so the noises my car make aren't quite as defined and as noisy as what this car does. But I want to try to let you guys experience just what this sounds like without any of my verbal input. I want to touch real quick on the air conditioning, and we can talk about the heater as well. Being a more modern Ferrari, the HVAC systems in these cars work as good as any other modern vehicle that you'll get into. Some of the older cars that I've had, including my Testarossa, I've had a number of 355s, I've had a couple 348s. Great cars, but especially speaking to the air conditioner, we're not talking something that's going to get you real comfortable on a warmer day, especially in my region, the California Valley, Northern California Valley here in Sacramento. So now that we're beyond that, I'm entering a corner here, and the confidence that you can get from the handling of these cars is amazing. The feedback, again, it's everything that you get back through the steering wheel, through your butt, to the seat, to the chassis. It's just there pristine, and this car is no exception. So the amount that you can kind of take your ability and use this car as a sports car and use it to really be a fun car to drive is huge. It's so much better than so many other cars in this price range, in my personal opinion. Yeah, so in conclusion, this kind of sums up what my opinion at least is on a Ferrari 360, and the great news about this car is it's actually going to be on Bring a Trailer very soon. And so if you're interested in purchasing it, go ahead and take a look at that on Bring a Trailer, and it'll be up for auction, and you can all kind of take a stab at grabbing it. I want to thank you guys for watching very much. Again, this channel is going to be Colby on Cars. I would love to do more of this. I'm certainly open to criticism as well. This is going to be my first video on the channel, and if anybody would like to make some comments, please leave them down below. If you did like what you saw, give me a like, give me a subscribe. I greatly appreciate it, guys. Thanks again for watching. Have a great day.